Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Office Hours. It's just me this week because Flo is on paternity leave and Slavo is off. So yeah, it's just me. And I can see we have a question in the chat already from Antioch. Waiting for the start. My question: is it possible to change the language path in the URL without reloading the page? It's a very good question. Let me just check if we have anything in the docs about this because I'm not too sure myself. I don't believe it is Antioch. It would be something I need to check because I assume you've tried it yourself. It's something I haven't tried before, but I'm guessing you're using the change language action and it's not actually changing the path. You have to reload. I assume you've already tried that. If so, I don't believe it's possible, unfortunately, but I'm not entirely sure. It's one I would have to double check. Hiya, Will. How would you do a 3 to 4 step onboarding in WeWeb, including images and status of completion? We might have a video on this actually. Let me just check that. The way you would go about something like that is you would need to have multiple divs set up on the page and you would need to control their display. So if you had 4 divs, you would also have a variable called like current step, for example, and then you would bind the display of those 4 divs depending on the current step. So the first div you would bind to be when its display would be when current step equals 1, for example. Div 2 would be when current step equals 2, and so on. And then in each div, you would have arrows set up. So you press next arrow, it increments that current step variable plus 1. Press the back arrow, it decreases it by 1. That kind of thing. As I say that, let me just check if we have some kind of video on it because it helps to visualize it. Also, if you have anything set up for that, Will, you're more than welcome to join me in here and we can walk through it live. If you already have some kind of attempt at it. Put a link in the chat, by the way, Will. If you do have something, you're more than welcome to join. If not, I'll look for the video that I think we might have somewhere in the meantime. I will put 2 links in the chat for you, Will. I found some good posts in our community forum where this has been asked before, related to creating a multi-step form. They should hopefully help. No worries. Does WeWeb have any examples of landing page animations that are really cool? Unfortunately, we don't know. I think the best thing you could get is we have a marketplace if you haven't already checked it out. And on there is some cool things people have put up that have animations. So you might be able to clone those and see how they've set it up. I'll put a link to the marketplace in the chat. You can go on there, and then each time you click on a template, you can preview it. There's a preview button, and then a cloning button. You can preview it. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at it now. The exact wording is see demo, and then get template. You can press see demo, and then obviously you can preview it, and you'll see some have animations. If you like them, you could get the template and see how they set it up. Another thing you could do is the AI that we have is actually great at creating animations. So you could just create a blank page and then ask the AI to create some kind of landing page with animations on scroll or whatever it might be. It's very good at that. So there's two things you could do, but unfortunately, direct examples that we personally have, unfortunately, we don't have any. But they are definitely possible because there's whenever you click on an element, there's an animations panel at the very bottom of the styling, and you can obviously use that to set up animations. And then you can, even outside of that, you can set up different animations. You can use custom CSS at the bottom. If you change the translation property of an element and give it a transition, so like if you change the translate X to 50 pixels to the right and then add a transition, whenever it moves those 50 pixels to the right, it will use whatever transition you've set up, so it will move cleanly. So you can, even if you don't directly create an animation natively, which is usually done via keyframes, you could do it just with changing the translation, so the position, and then adding a transition and things like that. But there's a couple of different ways you could do it. I have just realized, by the way, Will, that on the marketplace I linked, there is actually a template for a multi-step form. So you could definitely use that for your use case. Hiya, Davey. Are you familiar with dynamic page indexing? I set it up, but now some of my redirects aren't working anymore, even after updating the domain. So what do you mean by dynamic page indexing? Because if it's what you're referring to, I think it's something not native to us, right? You're using, there's a couple of different ways you can do it, but I think one of the ways we previously put up via the forum had to do with Cloudflare and something manual to set it up. At least I think if that's what you're alluding to, could you give me a bit more information? If you have a question, you're more than welcome to join me. I've put a link in the chat. You can join me and we can share screens and you can explain it, or feel free to put it in the chat if it can fit in the chat, basically. Sometimes it's more useful to join and go through a use case. Related to marketplaces, yes, I use Cloudflare. Yeah, so unfortunately, Davey, I can't help too much because it's just not something I'm super familiar with. Probably the community forum is the best place to go for some support on that, or you can get in touch on the support chat. Unfortunately, it's just not something I'm super familiar with. I'm sure you have a link to the forum, Davey, but if not, I'll put it in the chat just in case. Hi, is it possible to add 3D animated backgrounds in WeWeb? Yes, it would be, depending on exactly how you want to set it up. So natively, could you do something? Probably not. It'd be quite difficult. The two ways that come to mind of how you could do it is there's different external tools out there, um, like Rive. I can't think of any others, but Rive comes to mind of that basically let you create 3D backgrounds, and they give you something that allows you to embed it in other things. So you could use one of the external tools out there to create some kind of 3D background, and you could then embed that into your WeWeb application, probably from an iframe or an HTML embed, actually, whatever they give you. But whatever it is, that's one way. You could basically use an external tool to create it, then place it into your WeWeb application via an embed of some kind. Or you could create a custom coded component. So if you know your way around Vue.js, you could do that. You could create a custom coded component yourself using some kind of 3D animation package, or you could ask the AI inside of WeWeb to create this for you. Depends on use case, how familiar you are, with Vue.js. Those are the two main ways I think you could do it. But natively, there's nothing for it, but it could absolutely be done via some kind of external means. Hi, Marcus. I was wondering how you can add text directly on top of things. I have a form that I created piece by piece in the site, and I'd like to have the word draft as giant text over the whole thing. What you could do, Marcus, is you could add a text element inside of that form. And if you give that text element absolute positioning, so when you click on the text element on the styling panel on the right-hand side, if you scroll to the very bottom, there'll be a position drop down or select, sorry. And in that select, if you choose absolute positioning, that will then position the text element basically relative to the container that's inside of. So I'm guessing you have a form container, and then you put the text element inside of that form container. When you put its position to absolute, the text element will then be relative to the entire form container and not kind of, the individual elements inside of the form. So that way it will go straight into, I presume you've got it set up so that the position is centered for everything. So if you have the text element will then go straight to the center of the form and ignore everything else inside of the form. But regardless, if you just put its position to absolute, it will then position itself completely relative to the form and basically go above everything. It'll disregard the position of everything else and then just make sure you give it a high Z index. What that'll do is make sure that its layering is above everything else. So if you give it a low Z index, it might appear beneath the other elements. If you give a high Z index, it will make sure it appears above all of the elements inside of that container. Hopefully that works. If not, feel free to join me. I'll put a link in the chat right now and you can join and we can share screens and we can go through it, but that should work, what I've just explained. Hi, Leica. Is it possible to upload a file without the big upload element? I tried to create a user profile and I don't find a way. It would be possible, yes. It would be certainly a lot trickier. Just because whenever you use our upload file element, it converts the file natively. So whenever you want to send a file to some kind of backend that you're using, it's not as simple as just uploading it and sending it straight away. There needs to be some kind of conversion usually to handle that sending of data, usually some kind of conversion to like base64 or some kind of data URL, for example. And the file upload does that natively. But by no means do you have to use the file upload element, but you would have to then create custom functionality to then do that conversion yourself. So you'd probably need some kind of custom JavaScript to take the file, process it, and then convert it into something that you can send to your backend, probably base64. It depends exactly what it is you're trying to send as well, because it could differ the code that you need depending on if it's a PDF, an image, that kind of thing. So in most use cases, you would want to use the upload file element just because it would do all that for you, the conversion that is, but you don't necessarily have to use it. It will just make your life a whole lot easier. I tried that last night and it seemed not to work, but I'll try again. Sure thing. And by the way, as I say, Marcus, feel free to join. Sometimes it's just easier to join and we can share screens and go through it. But yeah, hopefully that works. Yes. And Toik, I'll put a link to that's a known issue. I'll put a link to the icon documentation we have. I created a short video on how you can. Sorry, you're not talking about custom uploads. Yes, unfortunately, some of the icon sets that we have inside of WeWeb themselves, unfortunately, you can't change the colors. It's a known issue. I hope that we'll be able to address it in a few weeks, but obviously the devs are super busy, but it's a known issue. Apologies for that. And Marcus has joined me. Hi, Marcus. How's it going?
Hello, doing great. How about you? How about yourself?
Good. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Do you want to, should we jump in?
Yep. Let me just get my screen share started up. Should be this window. All right. So this is what I'm looking at.
Super.
And I was hoping to just have it as big red text directly over this whole thing when it's all done. But when I was playing around with the text element, it seemed to have been weird when I was trying to actually do it.
Okay, cool. Have you already got, do you mind just drag a text element on the page somewhere and then we can figure it out as we go. So you've got this, okay, cool. And so now what you might actually be better to do, because I didn't realize the form was basically the whole page. If you go to the position select at the very bottom of this panel on the right, sorry, just a bit further up.
Set position.
I think we might have it in effects actually. Sorry, my mistake. If you go to the bottom, I think it's in the effects drop. See at the bottom you have effects. There we go. Yeah. If you put the position to fixed, I said it absolute before, but I think fixed would work better.
Okay, I see it right there.
Yeah. And now if you how do we want to put it in the middle? You want it in the middle, right?
Yeah, just over this
okay.
This element right here.
Okay. In that case then, yeah. So let's do what I originally said. That probably works better. If you click on that text element again, the one you added. Yeah.
Where did it go?
You've got it now. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you put its position to absolute, so now it's there. And if you click onto this div you have at the top, so the shared C display area on the far left, so like the container the text element is inside of. If you click that, the shared, yeah, exactly, yeah. And if you now go on the far right and scroll to the top, or not the very top, but keep scrolling, there'll be an area where you can, there we go, here. So you've got justifying, so you have justify on center. Why is it not? That's interesting. So if you click back onto the text element, the one we added, and then you go back down to the positioning, you might just have to put, so if you put in top 0, and now just change it back to automatic. So you see the pixel. If you press PX beside the 0 you put in and put it to auto, just want to, okay, yes, I think that might have worked. And then if you put if you scroll down for me, just to make sure that the text is now in the center, it is. And I think we need to change the Z axis, I think. So on the right, you see Z axis. If you put that on, cool, there we go. So now I think you'll just need to change its color and make it bigger.
Okay. Then let's say if I made it like 50, for example. And then does it block the rest of these from being editable?
No, it wouldn't. So if you wanted to do something like that, what you could do is you could add another div into here. So similar to what you did with the text element, you could add another div inside of this and do the exact same thing, give it an absolute position, and then set it to width and height to 100%. So that way it basically takes up this entire form container. And you'd kind of want this to be an invisible div, but higher than the form container, if that makes sense. So whenever you don't want it to be editable, you could have that div that's taking up the entire thing appear. Just make sure that its z-axis is higher than the form itself. So that way it seems like there's nothing there for the user, but there is actually something there. It's that invisible div. And because it's higher than the form, you could have that div that's taking up the entire thing appear. Just make sure that its z-axis is higher than the form itself. So that way it seems like there's nothing there for the user, but there is actually something there. It's that invisible div. And because it's higher than the form, you wouldn't be able to click on the things behind it, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I want to make it so that these are clickable.
They are clickable. Sorry, yeah. So they right now they would still be clickable. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate that.
No worries at all. Glad I could help. Cool. Right. Let's get back to the chat. I know we had some questions in between. Sometimes AI created workflows and design that isn't working when editing it manually, and we have to recreate the workflow. Okay, interesting. As in, you recreate the whatever the AI created with in the workflow. You just basically build it yourself manually, but you do the exact same things the AI did and it works. If so, please do file a bug, because that obviously shouldn't happen. Hey, Tamar. Hey, can I get more data except stop that from the next step using Kanban? Can I get more data except step dot, I think it's step dot value? Can I get more data? I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Apologies, Tamar. Yeah, sorry, I just saw your message after that. Salue was value. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Tommy, would you mind just giving a bit more information? Apologies. Google Analytics with WeWeb. Unfortunately, I don't think there is, Elena. We have the Google Tag Manager plugin, which you could use to set up and then integrate that with your Google Analytics. But in terms of a step-by-step guide, unfortunately, we don't. Yeah. Let me check the docs to see if there's any kind of information that's been created in the past about using Google Tag Manager. Yes, so I will put, we do have, Joyce previously made a good video, I think, on using the Google Tag Manager in WeWeb. So I'll put this in the chat, Elena. But in terms of how you then, again, I haven't used it, so I'm not entirely sure. But how that then integrates with Google Analytics, I don't know if you have to do something to then hook this up. My guess, because I've used Mixpanel before, or Segment, sorry, and there is a Segment plugin which is similar to Google Analytics, where basically whenever a user does something, you send an event. So it's much like the Google Tag Manager. But I don't know if the Google Tag Manager, you need to do something to actually directly link that with your Google Analytics. I assume not. I assume if you've got the Google Tag Manager set up, it feeds in automatically. But yeah, hopefully that should help. Hey, can we connect WeWeb RTC to WeWeb? Oh, sorry, Web RTC to WeWeb. I'm not entirely sure what Web RTC is. Let me just quickly Google it. Real-time communication. Yep. Web RTC. Real-time, yes. So in terms of actually using Web RTC, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure about directly Web RTC. I don't believe so, off the top of my head. I'm not entirely sure what WebRTC is. I'm just looking at it now. But in terms of real time, it is possible. However, it's a bit, I wouldn't say it's a bit tricky. It depends. It's dependent on using certain backends, at least natively. If WebRTC is something that you probably need custom code for WebRTC. You could get it to work, but you would need to create some kind of custom code on your side to get it working. If you don't directly need to use WebRTC and you just need real time, you could utilize Supabase or Xano. They both have some kind of real-time functionality. And then we have built into the plugins that we have for WeWeb and Xano, basically native actions to utilize real-time. So that's the best way to go about it if you aren't dependent on WebRTC. To get WebRTC to directly work, I think you need custom code. So you need to create probably a custom plugin, which you need to get in touch with the team directly to give you access to create that. But I'm not 100% familiar with WebRTC, but based on my knowledge, I think that would be the needed steps. Either use the real time of Web and Xano or Supabase to get it to work natively, or to use WebRTC. I think you would need to get in touch with us to create a custom coded plugin for your project. But yeah, I'm not 100% certain, but I believe that's the case. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by Lyco about having the possibility to build AI agents natively. There's a couple of, I guess, different use cases I'm thinking of on what you're explaining, but if you could give a bit more information on like what kind of agents you're referring to, then I can probably give a better answer. What's the best option to make mobile animations to change the page with a sliding effect? So if you wanted to change pages with some kind of transition, it wouldn't be possible right now. There's no kind of page transition animations. What you would need to do is basically set up the pages that you want on a single WeWeb page. So if you had, I don't know, like let's say you have a login page, and when someone presses reset password, it then nicely slides in with the page where you input the email that you want to send like the reset password email to. You would need to have both of those pages, in quotation marks, air quotes, on the same WeWeb page, and then manually handle that transition and make it seem like they're two separate pages. And you would need to have, if you wanted the URL paths to change, you would need to have a dynamic path set up, where you have the whenever you set up a URL of a page, you can have that path be dynamic. As I'm saying this, I'm going to get up the documentation because the documentation would be a good example of this. You can have a dynamic path in the URL. And so whenever you click reset password in this example, you'd want to navigate to this page, but pass in a path like reset password, for example. So actually you're going to the exact same page in WeWeb, in your WeWeb app, but you're making it seem like it's a brand new page and it is going to a different path. And then just have it so that whenever, let's say like the path equals reset password, that reset password div with the input then transitions onto the page in some way through some kind of translation. So you change like the X property to move it into the center and make sure it has a transition, something like that. You would have to do a bit of a manual workaround because unfortunately right now there's no way to natively transition between pages with animations. And I will just load up the docs we have on navigation. I'll put a link in the chat. Antoik, apologies by the way. I think every time I pronounce your name, I'm pronouncing it differently. If you don't mind, I'll say "and" for now. It's probably the best. Otherwise, I'll pronounce it differently every time. But I'll put a link in the chat now. Probably the section you want to go to is SPA navigation. It's probably the one you'll be most interested in by the sounds of the use case. Hey, Tomo. Hey, about the Kanban, when I'm moving my items between stacks, I can only reach one type of value from the Kanban stack, and not all the data binds to the stack. I'm not entirely, let me just quickly check what the event value of the Kanban gives you. As I'm loading this up, I'll go to the next question. The link was removed for some reason. I've asked if we can easily integrate view components like Vue Toastify. Yes, so as long as there's a view component, you would be able to build it as a custom component. If you know your way around Vue, then it's a case of building a custom component and then obviously importing the Toastify library or whatever it might be, and then building the component around it. We do have developer docs. I do need to work on them a lot because they need a bit of TLC, but they do exist. I'll put a link to them in the chat where it walks through how you can go about building a custom component. But in truth, if you're not familiar with Anton. Okay, Anton. If you're not familiar with Vue.js, Anton, the best way you can go about it, in truth, I think, is just asking WeWeb AI to create a custom coded component. You could ask it to create a Toastify custom coded component, and it'll do a pretty good job. In truth, this I think is one of the best things that AI is capable of. So I would definitely give that a go first if you aren't, a native Vue developer, but it's definitely possible because it's a Vue library. And I'm just getting up the Kanban now, Toma, to see what the event data passed is, to see what you're talking about. So I see, I'm on my side, Toma, I'm just seeing now, I'll share my screen quickly. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what you mean. Because I do, in this, so I'm just here, I'm returning the value to see. There is in the event this item data, which just comes straight from, obviously, the binding of the items here. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean about you can only reach one type of value from the Kanban stack and not all the data binds of the stack. If you mean like every single item, I don't think that's what you mean. Yeah. Sorry, if you could just clarify once more, because I'm not entirely sure. Hey again, Eagle. Okay, I see what you mean. Xano's real-time allows you to receive messages instantly, but let's say you want to make an audio call on WeWeb or using Xano. Is it possible? An audio call. It's a very good question. I'm not entirely sure. So I did see the other day, I'll try and find this actually. Someone created they had a use case where they had some kind of live call in place. I'll try and find it now. So I believe it's possible. Exactly how you go about it, I do not know, but I'll try and find it now as I'm saying this. I don't think they use Xano for it though. I think they had to create a custom coding component to handle it. Because as you said, I don't think Xano's real time would handle that, but I'm not entirely sure. It's quite an advanced use case. As I'm trying to find this up with your questions. I've detected that we have now worked with display none and condition to display the same way. So how would we create appear hide effects? Now I'm using size, position, opacity to make an animation. So you could do that. You could have, I'm going to make some assumptions, Anton, but please put in the chat if at any point in time I mention something you're not familiar with. You could create two states, for example. So a state for show and a state for hide. And in your show state, you could have like a condition for the display. It could be a variable, whatever it is, but just create some kind of condition on your custom state to handle the display or hiding, whichever the custom state is for. And then in your show state, whatever the custom state is, you would then change, as you're doing now, I think, the size, position, and opacity to be whatever it needs to be to show or hide it. You could do it that way. Similarly, a different way you could do it is you could have what's termed keyframe setup. So this is kind of natively how you set up animations in WebDev. You use keyframes. If you use the animations tab at the bottom of the styling, that will create keyframes. Or you could get keyframes off the internet and put them in the custom CSS. And that way, whenever you change the display, it will trigger that animation. So if you had a keyframe set up so that it moves from right to left, and when it goes to the left, it changes from opacity 0 to opacity 1. Whenever you toggle the display from none to flex or something that makes it visible, it will trigger that animation. So it can sometimes make life a bit easier because you could just have a keyframe set up on the element and control its display. And that way, whenever you show it from using the display toggle, it will then automatically trigger that show in animation. So there's two ways you can go about it. The way you're doing now definitely works. It just depends on your use case, really. No, unfortunately not. You would have to, well, there is, whenever you, I'll show you actually quickly. So whenever you are on an element, you can give it an ID here. So I'll just give this an ID, and then you can watch scroll position. And then whenever you watch scroll position, if you go to here and then go to components position, you then have access to this element. So you can see here I've given an ID of 000 and turned watch scroll position on. And so now in components position, I can see it here, and I can see this X percentage and Y percentage. And this basically has to do with the scroll. So you can see I can't scroll very far, but when I scroll down here, you can see the Y percentage changes. So you could potentially set something up so that when the Y percentage is 0, for example, because that means it's just been scrolled into view at the bottom, you then trigger an animation and you have some kind of state set up or a condition set up so that it triggers when Y percent is 0. You could do it that way. It can be a bit tricky. The best way sometimes is just to utilize an animation, like I said, I think, and then control its display when Y percent is 0. But you could use the scroll position to do something natively inside of the editor. And then to answer your question, Tomo, about it's only this stack you're on right now, not the next one. By next one, I mean the stack you're moving the item to. Okay. So let's see, I had it on the Kanban. Return a value. So we have in the event value from 2. So you're on right now, not the next one. By next one, I mean the stack you're moving the item to. So you mean as in so I still don't completely follow. So you have from, this is obviously the 2 columns it is going to. So you have the 2 column. Did you want this is obviously the updated list is the entire list, but were you hoping to get just the updated list of the column it's moving to? Am I interpreting it right now? Yeah, Anton, that's what I was, yeah. So you're doing it how I suggested. It can be a bit tricky then when you use the Y%. Potentially what could just be better then is I haven't really got a keyframe to put in right now, but you could just add a keyframe in the custom CSS and then just change the display. Maybe that would work better. But yeah, it can be a bit tricky to use the scroll position because, as you said, you do need to figure out when to restart it. So unfortunately, there's no easy way to go about it when you are using the scroll position. But I think by the sounds of it, you are going about it how you would. But as I say, it can be a bit tricky to manage it all. Exactly. I have the from. I don't have the data of the to. So you want the. So like if I moved this to the middle column, you would want the entire data from this middle column. Is that what you're saying? So like the entire, just the list of data from the middle column? Okay, let's I'll share my screen again. We can quickly run through. I think you would probably need to do some manual filtering then. So what you'd probably need to do then is, if I go on the Kanban, you would need to set up some kind of manual return. So you would probably need something, so I'd want an array. And then on the, we had, this was fake data, because I dragged the Kanban onto the page and it comes with fake data. So I'll just use that as the example. Here in items, we have Kanban data, and this is just a variable. So if I go in here we go with Kanban data. So if this was your array, we want to filter it by the status. So what you could do is I could filter it by the key, and I want to filter the status column. And what I will filter it by, actually, I'll just make sure this works first. So if I do 2, it should return my item. Sorry, it's in the from one right now. What's its current status? Okay, so it's in to do. Where have I made a mistake? Kanban data status is to do. If I put this to do, okay, cool. Yeah, so that works. So what I would want to do then is I would change it so that the value that I'm filtering the status by is the one it's going to, like so. And obviously this still returns the exact same thing because they're the same. But this would filter the my data to return only the items, in this case with the status of whichever status I've moved it to, if that makes sense. Probably will be a bit different depending on the way you've structured your data, but hopefully that should give you something to go from. Got you. So to use the index or the value to get the data from the array of stacks. Yeah, so you wouldn't need to use, I'm not too sure because it depends exactly on how you've got the data set up. I don't think you would need an index. So in this case, if you've got like the statuses as a string here, you would just need to filter your data so that you only return the items with, in this case, the status of whichever status column you've moved it to. But maybe you're using numbers, but even then, I don't think you would need an index. I'm guessing you've got this status, like the grouping of the columns done by some kind of string here, in the same way status is to do. So I think you would need something like this. But again, it's difficult to say without knowing your exact use case. But I think you would need to do some kind of filtering. Instead of using an index, you just filter to return the items. So you get only the items from your data that have a status of whichever status column you've moved it to. I have seen your question, Anton. Just give me 1 second. I need to go into a different project. No problem, Sima. So to answer your question, Anton, you can actually do that in some ways currently. So for instance, here, I just got a blank project. I'll create a new page. And I can you can add pictures in. For now, I'll just take a screenshot. So I could take a screenshot of this, for example. And then in the AI chat, I can just paste in my image like so, and I can say, and it will recreate this. Right now, the AI is fantastic at designs. The one thing we're really trying to work on is the logic. So connecting it to Supabase, for example. we're working on something behind the scenes that improves the logic a ton, and we're hoping to release that in the coming weeks. I'm not too sure of the exact release date, but fingers crossed it's within the coming weeks, which should help a lot with Supabase logic. So for right now, doing this kind of thing and hooking up to Supabase in one go, it's tricky. You can do it over multiple iterations, but as I say, it's only just kind of getting there from a quality standpoint. But in terms of designs, it does already do it. So you can pass in images and it will recreate the images. And then obviously it does it all within the visual editor. So if there's something that's not perfect, like take this input, for example, if I wanted to add a bit more padding to it, because it's all within the editor, I can then change the padding. Here, it's just added a warning icon. But if I wanted to, obviously it's in the editor, so I could change the icon, that kind of thing. So you can actually pass in images and have it recreate the images. And I just reread your message, Anton. We do have a Figma integration right now. It's another thing that's in the backlog to improve because it's not perfect right now, but it does do a pretty good job if you use auto layout and that kind of thing in your designs and structure the frames in Figma well. We do have a Figma integration. It's a plugin in WeWeb where you can install the Figma plugin in WeWeb. Sorry, it's in the More panel. You don't need to install a plugin, but you'll need to install our Figma plugin. And then once you have the Figma plugin, you can then export it and import it from Figma into WeWeb. So we can do the Figma import, but then there's also, as I just showed, the ability to upload images into the AI and have it recreate it. Yeah. As you said, you can also use Figma for importing the stylings, which is it's good for. No, all good. I'm here for another 10 minutes. DOM effective, that's a good question. You could, but it would be tricky. You could do things on your side to make sure that the data you've bound into the Kanban, you only pass in data that's necessary per se. It would be tricky because like if a user wants to scroll down and see more items in the column, how you handle that is quite tricky, be very complex, because the data grid uses what's termed a virtual scroller. So it only ever renders the items that are in view, which you could set up on the Kanban, how it would require editing of the actual code of the component itself. And if you don't, if you're not a native view developer, it's pretty tricky. So making it DOM effective, I think the best way to do it would just be by being very selective about the data you pass in. So just making sure that you only show what's required in terms of data. It's difficult to say exactly without, again, knowing your use case. but maybe you pass in, I don't know, like the first 20 items in a column, and maybe you have like a load more button at the bottom. So whenever that load more button is pressed, you then, add in 20 more items to the data that's bound into your Kanban. That's probably the best way to go about it. You could add virtual scrolling like there is for the data grid, but it would be quite tricky because you'd have to manually edit the code. Is it possible to delegate a deployment comment to WeWeb itself? I have to type in some description, even if I've changed only one letter. That's annoying. Xano allows empty publication messages. Unfortunately not. I don't believe so. I think you always have to put in a comment. Yeah, because I think whenever you try and deploy, whenever you try and publish without doing anything, you'll always, it won't let you. So yeah, no, unfortunately, you always have to give the publisher name. I'd be curious of your use case, Anton. Are you trying to automate it in some way, shape, or form? Is that why you'd like to not have to give your publisher name? Or is it just a case of you deploy very often and it can be a hassle? Sorry, I just now see your next comment. That now your first one makes sense. Is it possible to delegate the deployment comment to WeWeb itself? That makes sense. No, so unfortunately right now, it's not like Cursor or something like that where you could have it commit and push for you. You have to deploy the project yourself. WeWeb AI can't write the comments for you. It can. The nice thing, one of the nice use cases for the AI actually is to, even if it's a simple workflow, it's nice to have it build it for you because it will correctly name all of the actions. It will name the workflow itself. It will just give a description to the workflow. So it can do everything else around deploying, but in terms of actually deploying for you and giving your deployment a name, unfortunately, it can't do that right now. But it's a very good suggestion, actually. I haven't heard that before. I will pass it on to the team. Why selects dropdowns can't follow the width of the element? I'm using instance to get parent node and get client width. I mean, there should be. It's difficult to say without. We have 5 minutes. I'll put a link to join me in here. If you have the time, it would be good to share screens just so I can see exactly how you set it up. Because I think it should be following the width of the element. But it's difficult to say without seeing exactly how you've got it set up. Actually, I mean, while I'm here, I'll quickly share my screen and I'll just add a I'll see now, so I can just put in a so if I put my flex box to be 1,000, for example, and then I put my select to be 100%. Yeah. So I'm curious what was the reason for setting up the way you have instead of just using width 100%? I'm not sure what the use case is. Just take the search with suggestions element from the starting kit. Okay. Sorry, it's you mean here, I think. No. There we go. It seems to take up the entire width for me. So in this flex box, if I change the width of this one out of curiosity, so if I make this 800 pixels, it still seems to take up 100%. So if I limit this to 500, it follows it. And then if I just set this to 100%, and then change the outer flex box, let's say I make it 800. Yeah, so it seems to follow it for me. Yeah, if you could create a support ticket, that would be brilliant. I'm not sure why it's not working on your side. Hey, Santosh. Yeah, so this probably isn't the best place to ask in terms of React or Spring Boot. WeWeb isn't a coding platform per se. So it's I can't be a career advisor, unfortunately, for that. The suggestions box itself. You mean the search result search container? And just so you know, Anton, I think you actually asked this earlier about. I think it was you who asked about example animations. I've just realized that whenever I passed in the image earlier and had the AI create it, it automatically added animations. So these are animations that appear. It's whenever you put it into preview, but in the actual published app, this would happen on page load. So just as an example. But for now, I will go back to what we're doing. Okay. No, it still seems, if I'm doing this correctly now, whenever I change the result search container, it still seems to take up 100% here. But yeah, apologies if I'm still changing the dimensions of the wrong element. But yeah, it's probably best if you put in a support ticket with a loom, just because that's obviously then your direct use case and the team can go through it. Cool. Okay, that is the hour. Sometimes it's down to follow 100%. Yeah, I think it's probably best, Anton, if you put in the support ticket and then one of the team can take a look, because it's odd. I'm not sure why it's not working. Sorry, but yeah, then they can take a look into your use case. Cool. Well, thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining me. It was just me this week. I think Slavo will be back with me next week, and we'll be here same time on a Tuesday. But thank you ever so much for your questions, and we'll be here same time next week.